Thank you very much indeed, Jim. As Jim has indicated, I am a serial offender. By serial offender, I mean that not once, not twice, but 3 times I have started something, and I haven't procreated a child and moved on, but I've started an enterprise and moved on. The first one was The Christian Parapsychologist, which was quarterly in 1975, and started under the auspices of the Church's Fellowship for Psychical and Spiritual Studies. But in 1978, I had a disagreement with the secretary of that organisation, and I resigned. And the literary editor, Archdeacon Michael Perry, took over the editorship, and he served for 30 years then as editor of the Christian Parapsychologist. And we continued to cooperate along with other colleagues, including Dr. Robert Gilbert, who is the current editor of the Christian Parapsychologist. And then in 1985, there came the starting of Theosophical history. But in 1989, the Theosophical Society in London, for quite good reasons, dispensed with my services. And so once again, I had to give up this parental responsibility, and then very kindly, Jim Santucci stepped in, and I'm really grateful for Jim doing this. And once again, it was a 30-year sentence. Oh, it was 30 years very shortly. And then in 2004, I started Psi Pioneer. That the first attempt actually was in around the year 2000. It was then called Psychic Pioneer. But I wasn't able to continue it then, and I restarted it in 2004, and I was assisted by Paul Gaunt, who was also researching the early days of the Spiritist movement. And then it happened again. My daily work was such that I couldn't continue editing it, and Paul Gaunt took over, and he became the editor for the next over a decade, actually, until 2016. So I've been involved in the procreation of 3 publications, and after a while, a short while in each case, the responsibility is largely passed to somebody else. So I can only ask for the mercy of the court. Stainton Moses, a Theosophist in spite of himself. What's the origin of this? Well, as Jim has said, I'm the librarian of the College of Psychic Studies, formerly the London Spiritist Alliance. And the library of Stainton Moses is preserved at the College of Psychic Studies in South Kensington, London. And it contains a set of the 2 volumes of The Secret Doctrine given to him by Madame Blavatsky. Sylvia Cranston says in her biography of HPB that Volume 1 appeared in October 1888 and Volume 2 in January 1889. Well, let's have a look at the title page of The Secret Doctrine. Next slide. Can we move on beyond that one? Actually, we seem to have skipped one. We're looking for the title page of a book. There we are. Now that's the title page of The Secret Doctrine as it appears in those volumes. And both volumes are actually called second edition. Can you see that on the top left in small letters? Second edition. A man called Charles Ryan, who was a Point Loma scholar, explained in an article, the sales of The Secret Doctrine were so large that a second printing was soon called for. This has been strangely called the second edition, but it was only a reprint of the original with the words second edition stamped on it. Actually, Boris Tezerkov gives the impression in his booklet, Rebirth of the Occult Tradition, that 1 or 2 typing errors were corrected. But anyway, Stainton Moses was one of those who received the second edition. Now, let's move on and see what HBB wrote. If we go to the next slide, she's written an inscription there, to my dear old friend, a Theosophist, malgré Louis, which is French for in spite of himself. Mr. Stainton Moses, M.A. Oxon, that's his pseudonym, from his ever appreciative and faithful friend and admirer, H.P. Blavatsky, London, January 1889. That's an effusive message, isn't it? She presumably could not have sent Moses both volumes before January 1889 because the second volume only appeared then. But it looks like, as I just said, that because the first printing had sold out, she sent him both volumes in their second edition later that month. No doubt some people did receive signed sets of both volumes in their first edition. Some years later, she sent him a copy of the Key to Theosophy with a written message. And when she died in 1891, he wrote an obituary in the newspaper Light, and he called her a friend.
Newspaper what?
Light. Light was the weekly newspaper of the London Spiritist Alliance, of which more in a few minutes. In 1875, Stainton Moses, who had recently become a leading English spiritualist, began corresponding with Colonel Olcott and Madame Blavatsky, who shortly formed the Theosophical Society in New York. At some point, Moses became a fellow, but soon resigned. In his old diary leaves, Colonel Olcott wrote warmly about their discussions and experiments, which had suggested a relationship between the powers of Moses and those of HPB. Moses later became an important character in the Mahatma letters, which were mostly received in India, and in the Theosophist, which had been founded in 1879, and in the Spiritist newspaper Light, started in 1881, and elsewhere. He and HPB debated for over a decade the strengths and weaknesses of their differing interpretations of the powers latent in man. Initially, Stainton Moses regarded Madame Blavatsky as an authority, having been told this by some of his spirit teachers. For example, on August the 17th, 1875, Stainton Moses wrote in automatic writing in his notebook, "I have a letter from Madame Blavatsky. I want your opinion." And two of his spirit guides, Rector and Prudence, replied, "We told you that we were influencing friends in the body to give you help. You will get much from her. She is an adept and will help you. The friends say that it is well that you should enter into correspondence with her. Her statements contain truth. But do not question me more closely yet. The time is not yet come." And again, on October the 3rd, 1875, Rector wrote for another entity, trans-entity, Magus, "You have now learned more than we have ever before been able to get into your mind. We are communicating the same knowledge to our friends, Olcott and Blavatsky, and you will hear from them. But the Baroness knows it all before." The Baroness is H.P. Blavatsky. "She is deeply instructed." "An adept?" asked Moses. "Yes, of a high degree," was the reply. It has to be admitted that the Magus communicator, who first appeared in 1875 after Moses came into contact with the Theosophists, was a dubious entity. It is clear, however, from letters by Stainton Moses, quoted by Olcott in his old diary leaves, that Moses was for a time very enthusiastic about occultism. Indeed, Stainton Moses actually began occult as distinct from psychic training. In his review of A.P. Sinnott's 1881 book, The Occult World, Moses wrote, "I go on to notice a very beautiful manifestation of occult power which is frequent in Madame Blavatsky, and of which I have had large experience also. It is the sound in mid-air of a bell, sometimes striking a single note, at others a succession, and in my experience, sometimes ringing violently. To Madame B, it is a signal that attracts her attention to someone of the brothers who desires to converse with her. To me, it was a signal of the presence of a spirit who used a generic name of Magus. I believe there are several of these, and I know less about them than I do about any other spirits who regularly communicated with me. The spirit who originally used the name came to me when I first became interested in the study of occultism, and he was extremely skillful in producing manifestations of occult power. Under his guidance, I made a long series of experiments which satisfied me of three things. First, that the powers claimed by the occultists are real, e.g. the projection of the soul, the effect of an energizing will, and the like. Secondly, that they are of another order from mediumship, though the results are very similar. Thirdly, that their exercise is incompatible with ordinary life in the world. I therefore abandoned the experiments, but not before they had done me a certain amount of physical mischief, from which I believe I have never fully recovered. That review, incidentally, about occultism and spiritism, the AP Synod book, has been reprinted in Sci Pioneer, so you can find it online, as Jim indicated. It's a review that will repay careful study. Sometimes the TS founders, Alcott and HPB, made distinguished people honorary fellows of the newly formed society. It is possible that this happened with Stainton Moses. The appearance of Stainton Moses in the register of early fellows held at Adyar is not contemporary. Michael Gomes wrote to me on the 4th of December 2018 in a private communication that Colonel Alcott says the register was put together by Anna Ballard during her stay at Adyar in 1892. There would have been no admittance forms for the very early members, those listed in the 1875 minute book. But soon after, it would have become a necessity that there were such forms. I give an example in my book, The Dawning of the Theosophical Movement, of Baron de Palm's membership application, dated the 2nd of February 1876. There was also the obligation of secrecy form, which lasted until the 1880s. Whether the register at Adyar is the original or was further recopied, I cannot say without looking at them again, but the binding is similar to those of HPB's scrapbooks, which was done under CJ's administration, Mr. Gennaro Dassa. And Kurt Leyland wrote to Dr. Charles Smith, the Alfred Russel Wallace scholar, and others, again in a private communication of the 5th of December 2018. The only real information we have about Wallace and Stainton Moses is that they are recorded as having joined in 1876, and the day and month are unknown. Many other entries from that year and from 1877 are similarly limited only to the year. Possibly this suggests that there are no original paper records for many members from that period. Exact dates for all entries begin in January 1879. So this is an interesting situation. We've been editing and producing Theosophical history for a quarter of a century, and near the end of that time it dawned on us that the actual first names listed in the register of members were not contemporary, but were written later. This is not unknown in history. I think various lists, like lists of kings and lists of gospels and lists of popes even, sometimes are composed subsequent to the event, and they're not contemporary, although they may come to be regarded erroneously as contemporary. As an indication of the real friendship between Alcott, HPB and Moses, consider these photos. If you can go on to the next one. Now you may recognize those images. There aren't very many images of Madame Blavatsky, incidentally. There are a number of photos of her around, and some are signed, but I do not know of any with these signatures. The first one says, Hachimora to M.A. Oxon, with due regards. And the second one says, the Mulligan of 1878. Mulligan is a humorous name used originally by Alcott in a game played by HBB and him after a day's work in New York. He himself was Maloney in an imaginary Irish saga. And the other name, Hachimora, is a pseudonym for a short story which HBB wrote in 1876 called The Luminous Circle. It's in Collected Writings, Volume 1. I don't know of any other photos of HBB which have been signed with pseudonyms, but I'd be interested, of course, to know of it. If we look at the next slide, which shows the back, there's a name there, Beardsley. Okay. And Jocelyn Godwin has pointed out to me about Beardsley, the photographer, that HBB wrote to Hiram Corson from New York City after her visit to Ithaca, and she said, "When will Beardsley send me the rest of my portraits? Please order from him 24 more of those with the cigarette in the hand, only bigger if he can do them." That's in a book called Some Unpublished Letters, edited by E.R. Corson. Nowadays, of course, you can't show cigarettes in photos like that, and we have one at 50 Gloucester Place where somebody has done their best to remove the cigarette from the picture. But the fact that she did send these photos to Stainton Moses with the pseudonyms is an indication of the intimacy between them. Why then did Stainton Moses resign his fellowship in the TS? I suspect it was the publication in 1877 of Isis Unveiled, with its lacerating criticism of mediumship, which precipitated this. Moses therefore played no part in the troubled history of the British Theosophical Society, founded in 1878. But in January 1879, when Alcott and HBB passed through London on their way to India, they met their friend Stainton Moses for the first time. Of course, C.C. Massey, the London barrister and president of the British Theosophical Society, had been a founder member of the TS in New York in 1875. Soon after the founders arrived in India, their relationship with Stainton Moses reached its nadir, its lowest point, with the receipt by two new TS members, Sinnott and Hume, of Mahatma letters. Sinnott published edited sections of the early letters in his book, The Occult World, in 1881. Looking back on this time, Moses recalled in his private notebook, "Some months since, Mr. A.P. Sinnott came to London with a letter of introduction to me from Colonel Alcott. He had seen much of him and Madame Blavatsky and had put together some of his experiences in a book called The Occult World. He, that Sinnott, had imbibed opinions such as those propounded by Madame Blavatsky, and among them a great horror of vulgar spiritualism. He was not able, however, to recognize in my experiences what he felt able to condemn, and was compelled to admit that they formed a difficulty in the way of his all-round theory. I told him a good deal of what I'd seen and learned, and he wrote a letter, which he read to me, embodying this information to Kukumi, a brother with whom he had come into communication through the medium of Madame Blavatsky." Continuing what Stainton Moses wrote in his private notebook, and which was not made public until quite recently, "I amplified and stated what I'd privately told him in a review of his book, which appeared in the Psychological Review, July 1881. That's the review I quoted from. K.H.'s answer to Sinnott's letters had not appeared when he left England for India, and he sent me certain extracts from it in a letter dated July the 15th. These contained a direct claim that Imperator, That's the leader of the group of spirits that Stainton Moses worked with, and Stainton Moses actually represents him with a crown symbol. But Imperator is a living man, a brother, and that his dealings with me have been perfectly known to Madam B. I answered the letters at once and pointed out that I knew perfectly well who I, that's short for Imperator, is, that he'd always consistently told me the same story, and that he disavowed any sort of knowledge of the brothers or acquiesced in their ideas, and that somebody had evidently fabricated a preposterous story. I may say that those of you who are students of the Mahatma letters will find in the Mahatma letters a letter from Stainton Moses along the same lines, obviously preserved, I think, by Synod. Moses continues in his notebook, I've since received another letter dated October 9th, referring me to the Theosophist for October, in which appears an article called Fragments of Occult Truth, in which it is at length categorically affirmed that no spirits of the departed can communicate with man. On these facts, I solicit an opinion. That's what he writes to Imperator and his colleagues, the spirit communicators. I've not asked for any disclaimer from Imperator, the whole sequence of his teaching being so utterly opposed to such an idea as his being a brother, independent of the fact that he's disdained any sympathy with their views, but I should be glad to know what it all means. Imperator wrote back on the 6th of November, it is not necessary to say more than that the whole story is false from beginning to end. We know nothing of any brothers. There may be men who so style themselves. If there be, rest assured that if all of their ideas are as false as those contained in the paper referred to, it is well for you that they have not communicated with you. The purport of the falsehood, doubtless, is that they may have some answer to the objection which our teaching offers to their view of spiritualism. It is a daring falsehood. You at any rate are warned as to what their methods are. Avoid them. We are with you now, and we have never left you, nor has any other spirit ventured to assume our cause. And Moses commented, no doubt it is an utterly stupid falsehood on its face. The only facts they rely on are such as I have told Alcott or Madam B. What shall I do? Imperator replied, enter into no controversy. They who would resort to methods such as this are not within reach of argument. State the facts and warn your friend Synod, who has evidently been led astray. It will be no use. Keep your own counsel and do not get led into controversy. Do not ask further, all will be well, but you see what spirit is abroad and how far we have warned you truly. Stainton Moses added, I cannot help placing on record my opinion that of all the lying spirits in and out of the body, the author of this is the most daring and barefaced. Strong words indeed. But sometimes a surface disagreement masks a deeper agreement. This was the argument of Jocelyn Godwin in his magisterial work, The Theosophical Enlightenment, in 1994. He printed a summary of the early teachings of Madame Blavatsky and another summary of the teachings which came through Stainton Moses, and also those edited by Emma Harding Britton in her book Art Magic. And he pointed to similarities. Incidentally, although there is now a scholarly edition of Art Magic, edited by Mark Demarest, and considerable academic study of H.B.B's work, there is no academic edition of Moses' book, Spirit Teachings, 1883, which was originally published under his pseudonym of M.A. Oxon. I think we may have an image of that book. There we are, Spirit Teachings, M.A. Oxon. By day, Stainton Moses was a schoolmaster. By night, he was a spiritualist and amateur medium. As a schoolmaster, if it was generally known that he was involved in spiritualism, he could have got his school and himself into considerable difficulties, and that is why he used a pseudonym. It is clear from Spirit Teachings that the teachers of Stainton Moses rejected Orthodox Christianity and claimed that spiritual enlightenment could be found in many religions. Though they professed to be under the leadership of Jesus Christ, they evacuated from the faith anything exclusive. The passing of Stainton Moses on the 5th of September 1892 was deeply felt in English spiritualism, for whom he was, and I'm going to quote Frank Podmore, historian of spiritualism, the foremost champion in this country of the doctrine of spiritualism properly so called, the system of philosophy which ascribed the phenomena in general to the agency of spirits of dead men and women, and believed in the advent, under spirit guidance, of a worldwide religion. Now, just as Madame Blavatsky's teachings refuted Orthodox religion, so did those of Moses to a different audience, as did those of Mrs. Emma Harding Britton, and one might add those of Anna Kingsford and Edward Maitland, and of Lady Caithness and others. They were all part of a Theosophical enlightenment, to quote the book once again by Jocelyn Godwin, which matured in the late 19th century. Stainton Moses was thus an ally of HBB and her teachers, just as were secularists and freethinkers, as they all broke down orthodox belief. To quote from the 1878 version of the objects of the TS, the Society teaches and expects its fellows to personally exemplify the highest morality and religious aspiration, to oppose the materialism of science and every form of dogmatic theology, especially the Christian, which the chiefs of the Society regard as particularly pernicious. May I draw attention, however, to another similarity between HBB in Moses, in the claim that each was especially chosen for their mission long before. You will recall, for example, a memorandum by the Mahatma K.H., in which he stated, "After nearly a century of fruitless search, our chiefs had to avail themselves of the only opportunity to send out a European body upon European soil to serve as a connecting link between that country and our own." In the case of Moses, the claim was made that he had been pre-selected by spirit guides. In a very interesting sketch of his spiritual evolution received through automatic writing, Moses was told, "Nay, friend, but we thought for you first and guided your mind and moulded your conclusions. You were passing through a phase of existence which required anxious tending, and we judged it wise to withdraw you in time from the public position of a teacher in a church, which no longer represented your intellectual and religious plane of thought. You knew it not, you wished it not. It was by agency external from causes uncontrolled by you that we withdrew you from a place where your work was done and prepared you for another phase of your earth life. The tempering effect of bodily illness has been in all your life an engine of great power with us. We have maintained a wholesome control thereby." But the full text of this sketch is reprinted inside Pioneer. You see, the career of Stainton Moses in parish ministry in the Church of England had been terminated when he lost his voice and could no longer preach. He was obliged, therefore, to teach, initially as a private tutor and then as a schoolmaster. And through his friendship with Dr. and Mrs. Stanhope Spear, he was brought to investigate spiritualism. His guides also claimed to have kept him clear of matrimony. These are really quite startling claims that discarnate spirit entities are influencing somebody, not only in their religious evolution, but also in their personal life as well. Now, Stainton Moses functioned in a British spiritist environment, and apart from a brief trip to France in connection with spirit photography, He did not travel abroad during his spiritist years, so far as I'm aware. In contrast, the TS founders, such as Alcott, HPB and Judge, certainly visited London, and eventually HPB settled there in 1887. I am not sure how much she and Moses ever met after January 1879, when Alcott and HPB, as I said, had been on their way to Bombay in India. After 1883, the thoughts of Moses centred on a new spiritist organisation, the London Spiritist Alliance, which is now called the College of Psychic Study. This owes its origin and its immediate success to that one man. Do we have another image of Stainton Moses? This is Stainton Moses as an older man. We caught a glimpse earlier of Stainton Moses as a young person when he was coming into contact with HPB. But this London Spiritist Alliance was not the idea of Stainton Moses. It was the failure of two earlier bodies which led to the creation of the new one in 1884, and indeed before that of the journal Light in 1881, which is perhaps the oldest surviving psychic publication. You will recall that modern spiritualism, the ostensible communication with those who've died through mediums, is a movement which began in New York State in 1848, and by 1853, table turning and other forms of mediumship had spread to England. Emily Kistlingberry at one time became secretary of the British National Association of Spiritists, but after meeting HPB in New York, she defected to the Theosophical Society, and there were many others. The BNAS, the British National Association of Spiritists, was riven by discord. The provincial members thought the London members were too prominent, and the Christian Spiritists clashed with the radical Spiritists. There was also an especially quarrelsome member, his name's been mentioned already this morning by Jim Santucci, a spiritist editor called William Harrison, who for some years officially published the reports of the BNAS in his newspaper, The Spiritualist. It was to get away from him that the BNAS started its own newsletter called Spiritual Notes, and then in 1881, Dawson Rogers launched Light, a newspaper which was to appear weekly until 1944. Light published a column, Notes by the Way, which soon became written exclusively by Stainton Moses. And in later years, Moses became an editor of Light. The troubles in the BNAS gave Stainton Moses a nervous breakdown. This man, Harrison, wrote to his employer and drew his employer's attention to the fact that he was a spiritist and a medium. A terrible thing to do. The employer didn't pay any attention to it, the school, University College School, but it was very upsetting, and the man who did it, Harrison, was really ruined by that. His newspaper, The Spiritist, had to close. He even had to sell his library to the Society for Psychical Research, which is probably quite a good thing in the long run. The BNAS ceased activity. Stainton Moses had had enough of spiritist organisations. A short-lived successor, a Central Association of Spiritists, never took off. The mediumistic powers of Moses were by then much diminished, but in 1883 he was contacted with an important request. As he explained subsequently in Light, it is within the knowledge of Reader's Right that I've been engaged recently in promoting the formation of a society of old spiritists in London. I did this not of my own motion, though I fully recognised the desirability of having such a band of spiritualists among the other societies that exist, but by the urgent request of those invisible friends who are accustomed to influence me when their purpose requires it. It was on October the 21st that I received the first intimation of what was wished. I had not had any such message for a long time, for the power had ceased with me except when it is revived by those who use it, and this was not done except for a specific purpose. On this occasion, the message was urgent, and I was powerfully influenced. On October 25th, I set myself to do what I was told, and at a conference formed a committee to carry the idea into effect which had been impressed on me. The guides of Moses told him, the chief, which is what they called imperator, the chief has said all that is necessary, but many of our friends are inspired by the desire to take the matter in hand and are anxious to be heard. The details of action you know he never meddles with. He inspires the idea and leaves to others the execution of it. It is his practice always, for he is far removed from the life of your earth, and its practical possibilities are not within his grasp. Can't help thinking here of Madame Blavatsky and Colonel Alcott, because they get their instructions from the Mahatmas to get the Theosophical Society moving, and then they're left to get on with it. So, the College of Psychic Studies, or the London Spiritist Alliance, as it was then termed, was started on an impulse from the unseen. And with mixed feelings, Stainton Moses carried out their wishes. He did not like public speaking and wanted no more feuding on committees. So he chose the members of the council of the college himself. He chose well. Some of them were still serving 30 years later. The first public meetings were in 1884. The library and archives of the previous bodies, the BNAS and CAS, were taken over. Stainton Moses passed away in 1892, and Edmund Dawson Rogers became president until he died in 1910. Henry Willell, another of the founders, then led the LSA until after the Great War. In 1923, a medium called Horace Leaf, who was something of an author, wrote, "The London Spiritist Alliance is undoubtedly the most powerful single spiritist organisation in the world. Its membership extends throughout both hemispheres, and it includes all classes of people, ranging from the humblest citizen to those of historic importance." How was this achieved? With spirit help, with continuity of leadership, and with modest aspirations. As its name implies, the LSA claimed only to be a London body. It disclaimed any religious basis, though its leaders were much influenced by the Christian Unitarianism of spirit teachings. They saw spiritualism as the preamble to religion, not as a religion itself. We could argue that the LSA came from the same inner impulse as did the foundation of the TS, and I think that is, in effect, what Jocelyn Godwin argues in the Theosophical Enlightenment. Finally, may I raise the relevance of TS third object studies into latent powers of the work of Stainton Moses. Dr. Carlos Alvarado, a leading historian of parapsychology, has recently, in a paper, reminded us that Stainton Moses made important investigations into apparitions, spirit photography, and out-of-the-body experiences. And these experiences were read and discussed at the time, with HBB herself commenting on occasion. But of course, the phenomena around Moses himself were remarkable, and as Colonel Alcott noted in old diary leaves, similar on occasion to those of HBB. After Moses passed, the leading psychical researcher, F.W.H. Myers, who, like Moses, was a former fellow of the TS, contributed a two-part analysis to SPR proceedings of his mediumship. As Myers had been involved in the Hodgson report, his paper on Stainton Moses was not likely to be read by Theosophists. Then in 1923, all the records of Stainton Moses held at the London Spiritist Alliance were used in a penetrating book by A.W. Trethewey called The Controls of Stainton Moses, which did not attract theosophical attention. I think we may have an image of that book. There it is, the Controls of Stainton Moses. The author had been a member of the Indian Civil Service. He had a clear mind and he wrote clearly, and he processed a vast amount of material, and he did a very good job. His book was reviewed in the Occult Review and various other places in the psychic field, but it doesn't seem to have been come to the knowledge of any official theosophical publication. Because the main TS interest then was the coming of the world teacher. And third object work centred on what Dr. Besant and Bishop Leadbeater had revealed, with a few contributions from Dr. Arundel. With the full publication of the Mahatma letters in 1923, Moses became one of a number of characters in the letters. Along with Hume and Sinnott himself, who were, for many Theosophists, defined by the verdicts of the Mahatmas, rather than studied in their own right. Also, knowledge of the Victorian spiritist milieu in which Stainton Moses had moved faded away. And even the basic facts, such as when and why Moses and his friend C.C. Massey, the first president of the British Theosophical Society, left the TS, was known to few. Although Boris Tzerkov, while working on the collected writings of Madame Blavatsky, with the help of local helpers in London and elsewhere, clarified much. So, in a sense, Stainton Moses was theosophical in his work, refuting Christian orthodoxy. But not only did he convey a spiritist emphasis, which was alien to the main emphasis of the TS, but after 1883, he moved in a spiritist social group, the London Spiritist Alliance, which was separate from the ever-growing international Theosophical movement. Madame Blavatsky's description of Theosophist in spite of himself had only limited validity. Thank you very much.